Hi, happy Thursday. I hope you're having a great day. Back again with the Friendship War. We are on chapter 5 today, and it's called Show and Tell. When it's time for social studies Tuesday morning, I lay everything on the table that Mrs. Casey moved to the front of the room. The bobbins, the pens, the gear, the doorknob, the scissors, the hammer, the thimble, the needles, and the antique eyeglasses. I have a small assortment of buttons, and I empty them out carefully at one end of the table. It all makes an interesting display, like you'd see at a museum, or an antique store, or my room. I talk for a minute or so, then tell everyone what Grandpa told me about the history of the mill, and I explain how the things on the table came from different times during its life. Mrs. Casey asks the class to gather around, and as they do, she picks up the scissors. My stomach tightens like a little fist, and I think I might have just made a bad face, because from now on, whenever I look at those scissors, I'm going to have to remember two things: my wonderful afternoon with Grandpa and Mrs. Casey's pink fingernail polish. She opens and closes the long blades, and they make this great metallic swish, ending with a sharp snap. A tailor must have used these to cut through several layers of wool or cotton at the same time. I've never seen shears this large before. Following Mrs. Casey's lead, the kids start touching and inspecting everything, just what I was afraid would happen. But I don't really blame them. This old stuff is irresistible, like holding 100 years with one hand. Then, to complete surprise, a bunch of kids start going nuts about the buttons. A button shaped like a tomato? There's a ship on this one. Look at this super bright yellow. I love it. A starfish. And there's a baseball? That gold one with the eagle? It's gotta be off an army uniform. Ooh, diamonds! With all of the bright colors and some of them glittering in the pile, the buttons start to look like jewels that spilled from a treasure chest. Everyone keeps poking through them until Mrs. Casey says, "Thank you for sharing all of this, Grace. Let's get back to our seats now, and please take out your notes from the homework reading." The Burra Mills show is over, just like that. I gather up my stuff, and in another 15 minutes it'll be lunchtime, as if my show and tell never happened, which is fine with me. A second surprise comes about a half an hour later in the cafeteria. Taylor says, "Do you have those buttons with you? Could I look at them again?" From the end of our lunch table, Hank pipes up, "Me too!" So I take the bag out of my backpack and pour the buttons onto an empty cafeteria tray. As the tray slides down the center of the table, everyone leans in to look and touch. Everyone except for Ellie. She nods at the tray and says, "My mom used to do all kinds of sewing and knitting and quilting, and so did both of my grandmothers. We've got a drawer at home that's loaded with buttons, a lot more than that." Taylor says, "We've got buttons at home too, but these are way better." Brooke nods. "I've seen some buttons at my house too." "Hey, I've got an idea," Ellie says. "How about if we all bring buttons tomorrow? We can look at them after lunch, just to see what everyone has." This is the right moment for me to say the truth is, no matter how many buttons anyone else has, I have way more. But I don't say a word, and the other kids at the table are saying, "Yeah, and I could find some buttons, and cool, count me in." And I can't help think that if I had made this suggestion, everyone would have thought it was dorky, especially Ellie. As I bag up my buttons for the second time today, I understand what's happening. Ellie likes to be the one who has the most and the best of everything. She isn't too obnoxious about it, not usually, but I've seen her act this way before. I know exactly why Ellie suggests that all the kids at our table should bring some buttons to lunch tomorrow. This is not just a theory, it's because Ellie is totally sure that she has the most and the best and the prettiest buttons in the universe, and she wants to prove that to everyone. But of course, Ellie doesn't have the most, or the best, or the prettiest. I do. Probably. And for the first time ever, I think about the whole rest of the school day. And even as I'm doing my homework after dinner, Ellie and her buttons are right here inside my head. So just before bed, I begin filling plastic sandwich bags with buttons. I'm aiming for quality, variety, and especially quantity. I stop at 8 bags. That ought to do it. Because if Ellie tries to turn tomorrow's lunchtime into a big show-off session, then she's going to get a surprise from me. Chapter 6, Strange Galaxy. It's second period on Wednesday, and Hank whispers to me again. I can't tell what he said, but I nod anyway, again. We're sitting in the front row of the auditorium, and I'm turned halfway around in my seat so I can see the other kids as they arrive for our first 6th grade assembly. I need Hank to stop bothering me because I am on a mission, counting buttons. And I'm also keeping a running total in my head. 341, 349, 352, 355. When I can't quite see, I have to estimate. Flannel or long sleeve shirt, 8 buttons. Button front sweater or short sleeve shirt, 6 buttons. Pullover polo shirt, 3 buttons. Pants or shirts, 1 button, maybe 2. Skirt, 1 button. T-shirts, sweatshirts, or sweatpants, 0 buttons. Hank pokes me at his elbow. Mrs. Lang is looking at you. Here she comes. I hear him, but I keep counting anyway. Grace, face forward. This is not the time or the place for socializing. Under my breath, I say 363, and then I turn and sit back in my seat. I look up at Mrs. Lang. Sorry, except I wasn't socializing. I was collecting data. She frowns and shakes her head. Eyes front. That's our assembly rule. I always feel sorry for the teachers at assemblies. It seems like they're trying to show the principal and all the other teachers how their kids are just about perfect. But that's only a theory. Mrs. Lang walks on, her clipboard gripped in the crook of her arm, and I notice she's wearing pants, a collared shirt, and a sweater, at least 15 buttons. I want to turn around again to try to pick up my button count, but I don't dare. It's too early in the school year to risk getting on Mrs. Lang's bad side. I've got her for homeroom, plus math, and science, although maybe Mrs. Lang doesn't really have a good side. Then it wouldn't matter, right? Another interesting theory, but I don't want to test it. Not today. Instead, I tried to estimate how much of the 6th grade has already arrived in the auditorium when Mrs. Lang made me stop counting. Probably about 2/3. So, if the 2/3 of the kids were wearing about 360 buttons, then the remainder 1/3 of the kids would be wearing about half of many, 180. Which means that today the whole 6th grade is wearing 540 buttons, approximately. Of course, those are just the buttons on the clothes that kids are wearing right now. There are lots more buttons on all of their other clothes at home. The shirts, the pants, and jeans, and shorts and dresser drawers, plus the skirts and the other clothes on hangers and hooks and closets. And then there are the buttons on everyone's coats and jackets and raincoats. To get a scientific count of the 6th graders' buttons, I would have to ask every single kid to go home and study all of their clothes, count every button, and then fill out a form for me, which isn't going to happen. Besides, this sudden urge to count buttons, I know it's only a distraction, something I'm doing to keep myself from worrying about what might happen at lunchtime, right after this assembly. I almost never wake up early, but this morning at 6:15 I sat straight up in bed, sweating. I'd been dreaming about snowboarding down a mountainside. Then an avalanche broke loose above me, and suddenly that rushing hillside of snow turned into a towering wave of buttons, trying to sweep me under, bury me. In that moment I got myself fully awake. I started to worry about lunch and buttons. And the alley effect. My thoughts kept spinning, and I began to wonder how many buttons there are on the clothes of the other kids at school today, and the teachers too. And beyond the school, there are parents of the kids, at home or at work, with buttons on their clothes, plus all the rest of the people in this town, and this state, and this country, and this continent, and this hemisphere, and this planet. And what about the buttons on all the clothes on all the bodies buried in the graveyards? Everywhere in the world. Gross, but true. This would add up to billions and billions more. I feel dizzy and I tip my head back and stare up at the ceiling of the auditorium. It's like I've accidentally pointed a telescope towards a strange galaxy. But instead of stars and planets, I'm looking into an endless new sky filled with buttons. The assembly begins and the principal is at the podium on stage, waiting as the room gets quiet. Your teachers and I have known many of you for more than 5 years, and we're excited about the amazing year we've planned. It's going to be demanding, and so far, you're doing great. As all of us look ahead together, I'm hoping that Mrs. Potter keeps talking, but I'm having trouble listening. My hands are cold, and it feels like I have a knot in the center of my stomach. I hate getting upset about anything, but to feel this upset about buttons, it's not even logical. Because really, who cares about buttons? No one ever thinks about buttons. Unless one pops off and your pants fall down. I saw that in a cartoon, but there was no reason why it couldn't happen in real life. A button pops, gravity pulls, and pants fall. It's basic science. Simple cause and effect. Cause and effect? The first time I heard that phrase was during a second grade science lesson. It means that nothing happens without a reason. It means that events can always be studied and understood, which is so comforting. And suddenly I'm absolutely sure that what I need here is more scientific thinking, more understanding, and less emotion. Except right now, I understand the cause of my worries perfectly, and the anxious feelings that are only getting worse. Why? As soon as this assembly is over, I know that I'm going to stop by my locker, grab a backpack full of buttons, and then go to the cafeteria with my best friend, whether my stomach likes it or not. Alright, we're going to stop there. So tomorrow we'll get to hear what happens at lunch with Ellie and Grace and the other classmates. Have a great Thursday.